I'm live for Unscripted mental health chat with this wild man hippie with this crazy, not even hair, just what's it called? Mane. This lion's mane. I'm gonna put it back, I think. Anyway, nobody's here at the chat yet, but I got Ripley chilling like a villain. Starting it just a minute late, but hopefully that will not deter our regular 7 o'clock listeners. If you're tuning in and it's not 7 o'clock, I'll say this again at the end of the hour, but same bad time, same bad channel. We try to make 7 o'clock our regular time, and we would love to have you here for the chat to talk about mental health stuff. So whether you can afford therapy and this is supplemental, or you can't afford therapy and this is the best you can do, we're here to talk about stuff that people struggle with mental health. And it's an unscripted chat. I respond, hey, Jane, good to see you. Good to have you here. I usually don't call people out in the chat, but I couldn't resist. Anyway, we respond primarily to the chat. So I love it when people ask me questions about mental health, and we'll talk about that. But if I don't get a lot of chat questions, I will then just kind of cover topics that matter and come up to me. So they'll all be mental health related. We have some people that talk about religion a lot, and that's fine. But we primarily focus on mental health stuff. So we cannot guarantee any confidentiality. It is a public chat, which is why I try not to say, oh, this is so-and-so. Some names are obvious, like the person that chatted just now, of who they are. But if we can keep that anonymity a little bit, we do. All right. So mental health stuff. What are we going to talk about today? I mean, again, I'll respond to whatever's in the chat. But one of the things I wanted to mention is just I had an interesting episode last night, and I guess I want to have a little bit of a transparent conversation about my mental health journey that is hopefully inspiring to others and hopefully helps people get a realistic understanding of what these skills can do, how they actually work, and what the limits are of the mental health skills that we work on. So I might bounce around a little bit, but last night I went on a 5K run, which is not a lot for me. I did feel pretty full, so I kind of felt maybe a little nauseous in the last, and I wasn't going fast, in the last 2 miles. So it was only 3-mile run, 5K. The last 2 miles went fine, and then I kind of started feeling a little nauseous, so I slowed down. Finally, just decided to walk the second half of the last mile. Didn't feel too bad, talked to my friend Victor, and then after a little bit of talking to him, went upstairs, and then all of a sudden just started shivering and could not stop myself from shivering. Now, at the same time, even though my body was shivering, it's like I was processing, right? The first things that I was thinking about were my skills of how to regulate, because I'm like, okay, my system is getting dysregulated. So ice bath time, right? Visualization, meditation, breathing exercises. So I started focusing on my breath. The problem is I couldn't slow my breath down. So I was going real quick with the shivering. I couldn't control the shivering and I couldn't control the breathing. But I could control what I think about, right? So instead of focusing, I looked at my heart rate. It was fine. So I knew I wasn't likely having some kind of episode that needed to be in the hospital. And here's, I think, one of the ways that people sometimes get themselves into trouble, because they overthink in those moments. They start panicking, understandably, because they don't know why their body is freaking out. And when your body thinks your mind knows the answers, right? So your body is going, hey, mind, tell us what's going on. And when your mind goes, I have no clue what's going on, you tell me what's going on. And you go back and forth in this, it ends up escalating. Your body goes, I don't know what's going on. I thought you were supposed to. Who's in charge? I thought you were in charge, right? And so what I did instead in that moment is I told myself, I'm safe, I'm okay, and I'm just going to allow myself to experience this shiver. I'm going to be present in it and just go through it and see, what happens next, and just give it time and be patient. And I was shivering for definitely over an hour. It felt like many hours. I'm not sure exactly how long it was. But then the shivering came down, and the symptoms started to vary to a different thing. My mental health skills did not stop the shivering. There was a physical thing that was going on, likely an adrenaline spike thing, maybe from some of my weird diet stuff and fasting, maybe from training and doing a lot of physical activities. Who knows? Here's the reality. Our bodies, our minds, our spirit, all of it is very complicated. So we have very complicated systems. We are often looking for a simple solution, but the reality is it's complicated. There's a lot of nuances there. What I focus on as a therapist is when it comes to our emotions and our cognitions, essentially, right? Emotions and cognitions are the kind of work of therapy more than anything else. Now, that's a broad thing because it often includes things like existentialism and purpose and understanding rhythms and even neurology. So, like neural pathways and what are the things that we can be plastic on, because there's a thing called neuroplasticity, which means that your brain actually adapts to do different functions. It's amazing how adaptive it is. Like they've literally remapped individuals who were blind so they could use their nerves to essentially see through touch. Okay. Like this is from the book, The Brain That Changes Itself, I think is what it's called. But it talks about this experiment where they taught blind people by, at first it was mapping their back, and then it eventually became their tongue because there's so many sensors in their tongue. And they could end up kind of seeing, thanks for the thumbs up, whoever gave me the thumbs up and the heart. I know who that was. But anyway, they can kind of end up seeing with their tongue through an effect called neuroplasticity. Another example of neuroplasticity, a little bit less extreme, is they took new cab drivers in New York City, where it's very complicated, the road systems, and they mapped their brains before they started. And then I can't remember exactly how long until they mapped them again, but after doing the job for a while, and the spatial relation part of our brain actually grew for them, like in a noticeable difference from a brain map. So our brain is a muscle that can develop different skills, but those skills take time. So you do these, and this is why I love therapy exercises, because unlike chemical treatments, which have side effects and reduced efficiency over time, and that doesn't make them bad, but that's just the reality with chemical treatments. Skill-based treatments have increased efficiency, and the side effects are positive. So that you get more benefits and skills alongside whatever you're working on. So all that to say, when I'm going through this episode last night, that didn't fix it. It's not like I could control my body. Maybe with more to work, I could, honestly. But I wasn't able to in that situation, and I had to just accept it. With therapy tools, and in ACT, we have this thing called workability, where we kind of go through the litany of like, okay, here's optimal, right, of what I could do. Here's suboptimal, and here's practical, right? accept, choose, and take action, right, on what I can handle in the given day. I think I've talked about this before, but like my depression, so that goes back to another thing is like I used to suffer from depression all the time. And then I went through a phase where I was like, I don't remember the last time I've gotten depressed and I might never get depressed again. And sure enough, there was like a brief window where it came again, but definitely not near as bad as it ever had been. This isn't recently. But all that to say is I suffered from depression for a long time in my life. And when I first was starting to grow and really get better, it was where I could have this litany. This was my program that worked for me in the beginning stages with depression, okay? Not really the beginning stages, but the beginning of me getting out of having episodes of depression, okay? So this is what worked for me. This is not what I'm saying it was gonna work for everybody or in every level of intensity of depression because there's varying degrees of severity when it comes to depression. But what I would do is I had a routine, right? From getting up in the morning and doing these different things with meditation, with prayer, with exercise. I had this routine. And when I was depressed, I didn't have the energy to do it. So what I would do is I would try to snap out of my depression. But if I couldn't snap out of my depression, I would allow myself to feel all the feelings of sadness. I kind of like almost lean into it, but with a plan the next day to snap out of it and do my routine. And I'd think through that plan and I'd set up that plan as best I can. So, you know how sometimes there's things you can do to prepare for the next day? Like down to some people will have coffee that they can put on a timer because they have those drip coffee. And you, as long as you grind the beans and you put it in the coffee machine and you set the timer on the coffee machine, then it's going to drip that coffee. So coffee's already done by the time you wake up, right? That's just one example, but it's like if you got everything prepared ahead of time, maybe even your food prepared ahead of time, you're far more likely to do it. So what I would think through is like, okay, today I'm going to be depressed. I'm going to allow myself to be depressed, but I'm going to make a plan for tomorrow. And I'm going to set up everything I can for myself tomorrow to see if that snaps me out of it. Then if that didn't snap me out of it and I fell back into depression, I would then do the same thing the next day. So I'd be like, okay, day one didn't work. So, and by the day 3, when I started doing this, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, it allowed me to snap out of the depression, right? By just having, now, why do I think this works or worked for me, I should say? Well, for one, it was balanced in that I didn't judge myself for how much I was going to be depressed or how long I was going to be depressed. I made the plan for the next day to set myself up for success, but I also accepted that it's like, look, I'm not always going to snap out of depression. Sometimes I'm just going to fall into it, and I'm going to allow myself to feel it. There's another one where they literally scheduled depression for like 15 minutes or something like that. And this works also for grief, scheduling mourning for 15 minutes. That then allows them to have a time to process, but doesn't have that overshadow their entire life, right? All this to say is no matter where we are in the stage, when it comes to how we get through our emotions and we process, when it comes to mental health, it's a little bit of a paradox. Some of the times it's not as clear and straightforward as we think, and some of the straightforward approaches actually fall into negative feedback loops that keep us in our misery. So one of my favorite metaphors, I have talked about this before, but it's worth repeating, is the quicksand metaphor. Now, there's actually a little bit of a weirder way to get out of quicksand. You're kind of like leaning on one leg and like jimmying the other leg. But if you're trying to get across ice, as an example, or quicksand, you really want body uh, weight dispersion. Okay. So you want your body weight to be distributed to as many different parts of the surface of the thing as possible. And you know how you do that? By getting your face down in it. So it's counterintuitive because you don't want to get stuck in the quicksand. So your instinct is to try to get as far out of it as possible, right? You don't want to be close into it. But that's exactly what you want to do if your body distribution is spread out on the sand. Does that make sense? So what you're going to do is you're going to actually put your face in it to get through it and then kind of inch your way out of it. And that's a lot of times what you're doing when you're going through something of any kind of valley, right? Our bodies are listening to us, but that doesn't mean that our mind is completely in control at every moment. Our mind is the captain, but that doesn't mean it can control the ocean, right? There might be somebody who can control the wind and the waves, but that ain't us, right? So what we do is the best we can with the circumstances that we have. And if we can think positively, we can process, we can go through our emotions. But if we're struggling too much for all of that, we might just have to accept where we're feeling. Thanks for the next thumbs up. Got another thumbs up. Appreciate those. And we might just have to embrace it wherever we're feeling and allow our body. So last night, I just had to allow myself to shiver. I just had to put myself in a safe place and allow my body to do what it's going to do. It was weird. I don't perfectly understand it today. But it was survivable, and I didn't make it worse by freaking out, which I think I would have if I didn't have the skills of mental health. In the beginning of a broadcast news with Holly Hunter, she would have a good cry before she left for the day. Yeah, I mean, like everybody's different. I knew somebody that used to talk about, thanks for the hearts and the emoji and all that other stuff for the next person. I had a friend that would say that he tries to cry every day, that he says crying is just, I think he said, the noise his heart makes when he feels moved. And if he's not feeling moved every day, then he's not engaged, essentially. That he's not, thanks for the thumbs up, got another thumbs up, that he's not fully plugged in. So for him, normal was crying every day. And actually, I have a client, and this has kind of almost become famous for me because it was such a beautiful moment where she was crying and she said, "This is what healthy looks like," as she was crying in one of our sessions. And it was such a beautiful moment because that was such a turning point for her. And I'm so proud of her as a client. She's doing so good and feeling so much better than she ever has before. She was going through a lot at one season, and I remember saying to her in the technique of therapy that only someone as weird as I would give, but that I was like, I know this is going to sound really weird to you, but I'm really excited for the season of life that you're entering in, because even though you're seeing this as a really bad season, I know it's going to bring you to a happier place than you ever have been before in your life. And it was only like, maybe it was 6 months later. I can't remember. Maybe it was a year later. Maybe it was less. She said this. She said, I did think you were insane when you said that to me, but you were right that like this has been the happiest season of my entire life. Whew, man, it's like, how cool is that? Like, I was talking actually today in a sermon about C.S. Lewis with that Surprised by Joy. And, in it, he talks about how joy is not something we can control and manifest, right? If we take the strict definition of manifest, it's man making something, right? Manufacturing, essentially, manifesting. We can't manifest happiness, or at least true joy, right? Joy is something that kind of just is bestowed on us when we put ourselves in a good place, right? Now, with that said, I think there's another side to that in that we can develop a skill that allows us to not get in the way. Maybe that's the easiest way to say it. Like I've debated over like people say sometimes happiness is a choice, and I've always felt like that is almost true, but false enough to be misleading and sometimes put people into traps. Because they think, oh man, if I was good enough, or why am I not choosing to be happy? Like, or they'll try to choose to be happy and then they can't. And then they just think, well, maybe happiness is not something I can succeed at. Maybe I'm never going to feel happy. When I would say happiness is a skill in some ways, right? But it's like, okay, so like, well, let's. I mean, my go-to metaphor is like muscle building, right? That like you can put all the effort in the world to trying to lift a heavy weight. On one day, at a certain point, effort is just going to cause more injury, right? So the same thing is true for your mental health. Don't limit where you might get in 5 years if you're working on these skills. This is what I'm trying to say, right? Don't limit what this mental health techniques can eventually do for you. But don't confuse that to think that these techniques can make you feel better today. All of these mental health skills are like weightlifting. If you're diligent to do them, there is very little limit to what you can actually achieve. And so like using muscle as a metaphor, you can build a certain size to your muscle and then it kind of gets its genetic potential without like steroids. But strength actually works a little different. You can still keep getting stronger even if you're not going to keep getting bigger. At a certain point, their body stops saying, let's put on more size, but it starts packing those muscles down denser and denser, and they can still lift more and more weight. So the potential for your ability to lift weights is almost infinite. The same thing is true with mental health, right? Your potential for what you can achieve with mental health is limitless. But that doesn't mean that your potential for what you can do today is limitless. We have to accept our limitations today and then choose to engage in what matters and commit to those things so that we can build a future where we have more ability internally. I'm talking about, right? With this game, the whole world outside of this thing, we can't control and we should stop trying, right? But this we can more and more control with mental health work. Joy for me was having the ability to breathe deeply again, emotionally and spiritually. I realize now it's not about forgetting what happened, it's about realizing it didn't destroy you. Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's post traumatic growth, is what that sounds like for me, or to me, right? The ability to breathe deeply again. And I would say, you said emotionally, spiritually. I think that this is what you're implying by this, but kind of adding to that, like if you're engaging deeper, that's a good sign, right? Now that engaging deeper might feel painful because if you're engaging deeper and in a season of loss, that's going to come with a lot of tears and crying and processing, but it still matters. I mean, ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what are your values and what do you really want to engage in? And if the answer is surface level success or monetary success, it's like, okay, we need to ask good questions and why. Because ultimately, while it takes a little different form for what purpose and community looks like for each person, I do think that therapeutically, it ends up being fairly consistent that it's some idea of community and some idea of purpose, right? Some people's communities are really big, and some people's communities are really small, right? But they need community. Some people's purpose is something very simple, and sometimes it's something very grand, but everybody needs a sense of purpose. Okay, we got a question here. What's the difference between bipolar and borderline personality disorder? So there's a lot of differences. I do think borderline or bipolar is often well, I actually said it right the first time. Borderline personality disorder is often misdiagnosed as bipolar. Bipolar has became a little more popular. And I think that BPD, as it's saying for short, which is the borderline personality disorder, is something that people are scared to diagnose because it's got a little bit more of a stigma attached to it, which is unfortunate because it's not anymore a permanent diagnosis. In fact, dialectical behavioral therapy has been so effective at treating borderline personality disorder that it's kind of even the norm for people to not feel like they have a lifetime sentence once they're familiarized with DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy. Whereas bipolar is actually a harder thing. A lot of people with bipolar diagnosis do end up feeling stability only with chemical intervention. But okay, so bipolar is having seasons of depression and seasons of manic. And these seasons can last quite a long time. In a season of manic, they are like someone with ADHD, super high activity, going all over the place. It's someone like ADHD on steroids, right? They might be really happy, but they're just like constantly going. Right? I have a friend with bipolar, and I know when she has bipolar because like all of a sudden or when she has manic episodes, because all of a sudden I'll get like 100 texts in a row, right? Just right. That's manic mode. And then depression is the opposite, where they just can't seem to function, can't do anything, very lethargic, heavy depression kind of thing. Okay. Whereas a borderline personality disorder person is going to have that moment, but it can be literally a different in a day. So they might have this one day where they feel manic and depressed. If you have a day that you feel manic and depressed, you don't have bipolar. You might have borderline personality disorder. Now, basically, an average person, say they're at 5 on an average day from 1 to 10, and then something good happens, they go to 7, and then something bad happens, they go to 4 or 3, right? A bipolar person is rarely ever at 5. If something good happens, they're at 9 or 10. And if something bad happens, they're at 1 or 2, right? They have very high extremes. They have a real hard time sustaining relationships, especially romantic, and they often hyperfixate on the romantic relationship. It's also very normal for someone with borderline personality disorder to kind of take on the traits of their significant other. They can be somebody who love bombs, but not from an intention to manipulate necessarily, but just from a search for identity. So they often have attachment issues. They often engage in high risk behavior. Substance abuse is a high correlation with borderline personality disorder. And they will be, they have attachment issues a lot of times. A lot of times it comes from trauma. So they're looking for something to connect to and make their identity. And that's often a romantic relationship, which doesn't usually last very long. And so they'll go through different seasons where they kind of become like different things. None of that is true for somebody who has bipolar, at least by definition. So those patterns are not bipolar patterns. The attachment issues and codependency and love bombing and those kind of things, those are more the bipolar things. So, I mean, the borderline personality disorder thing. So I think that kind of answers the question. Let me know if there's a follow-up to that. But those are the big differences. Now, Dialectical behavioral therapy, just to give you a little glimpse of that, very similar to acceptance and commitment therapy in that it is rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. I might be bipolar. Um, well, it's like seasons of manic and seasons of depression. I can see that. Um, in some ways, with bipolar, it's like a more extreme version. So with a lot of the DSM-5 stuff, even dissociative identity disorder or schizophrenia, I think that there are a lot of people that when they look at it in an earnestness, they can relate to some of the aspects of it. It doesn't necessarily mean, and look, when it comes to any diagnosis in the counseling field is to guide treatment. It's not to establish a permanent identity. So all of this stuff is stuff that you can recover from. And for diagnosis to actually be given, it has to be a disorder, right? So if you're functioning very well in it, you don't actually have the disorder. So in other words, this is why like there's a lot of people that might have narcissistic tendencies, but very few narcissists. There are people that have emotional regulation issues, but very few of them strictly bipolar. There are people that go through season, like we all have hormone changes. Like all of us have a little bit of these things, right? Some people are on different ends of the spectrum, but in some ways, I would say probably every DSM-5 thing is a spectrum that's you might be on some level, if that makes sense. But yeah, with bipolar, I was going to talk about dialectical behavioral therapy for borderline personality disorder, but honestly, and it's like dialectical behavioral therapy can work for someone with bipolar too. The focus is emotional regulation, which helps whether it's a season of depression or a swing, right? From sad. But I think that, one pattern that people fall into that is probably similar to bipolar or represents in a way that is very much like bipolar is if somebody is disconnected. So let me back up here a little bit. There's something called internal family systems therapy that like identifies as different aspects of you. And what often happens to some people that are very emotional and passion driven is that they are positively reinforced for whenever that displays as happiness and joy, but they are negatively reinforced whenever that shows up as sadness. Do you see what I'm saying? So like a passion driven person will be sad and happy. They're not going to be more happy than sad. That doesn't make sense. Passion includes both of those emotions and both of those are valid. So someone is going to cry really easy and they're going to laugh really easy. There should be a whole lot of people on the planet that are very frequent laughers and very frequent criers because that's how God made them, right? They're just surface level emotions, like their emotions are on their sleeves and they experience both. But society doesn't treat them equally. Unfortunately, too often society treats the sadness with stigma and tries to get people to stuff that sadness down. But it embraces the happiness, joy. Oh, great. This is awesome, right? So what ends up happening is people are trying to disconnect a part of themselves that is deeply intertwined. And this is always going to come with a psychological cost. So if you're stuffing the part of yourself that is sad, you're splitting it into two different aspects of a personality, even though it's the same trait, which is passion. Okay. So then what ends up happening is you just fall into a season where it's like your mind hasn't had enough. They're like, you can't keep stuffing my sadness down. You're not letting me feel sad enough. And so I'm just going to make you feel sad for a month or two, right? We're just going to go through a season of depression. So, screw you. You've been stuffing your emotions down and not feeling these emotions. And now your emotions said, enough it's time. We're going to force you, and we're going to make you tired, and we're going to make you heavy until we can get you to feel sad. Right. And then you'll go through that sadness till you can get enough of it that your body goes, okay, we've had enough. And then it goes back to happiness again. So it displays very similar to someone with bipolar, but it's really more about not maintaining that passion in a way that doesn't judge and accepts the sadness and the joy equally. It sounds like me. I laugh, I cry. Where are my emotions on my sleeve? Where are my emotions on my sleeve? In other words, poker face, did not help in the corporate world at all. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people could try to think there's something wrong with that. Corporate world, family life, where it wasn't embraced, those feelings. But yeah, it's like if you think about it, like on the surface and you stop putting the societal values on it, it makes perfect sense. At least it does to me, that I go, yeah, somebody who laughs a lot should be somebody who cries a lot. Somebody who's, passion driven is going to feel a lot of emotions. They feel a lot of strong emotions, and those are going to display in different things. And it's like, why would we judge one as good and one as not? Why would we think that the laughter is, well, that's okay, that's appropriate, but the crying, oh no, that you can't cry. What's wrong with you? This is something, like broken about you because you're crying. And it's like, wait, what? Why? I don't understand. Isn't them both what our heart naturally produces? And why are they universal if they're broken? Right? If they're a fraction part of reality, then why do they show up on every human being or every culture, if not every human being? I mean, there might be some. I honestly think that it's usually a bigger sign if you see somebody who doesn't laugh, doesn't cry, right? Now, if somebody laughs all the time and never cries, or cries all the time and never laughs, what's going on there, right? That to me is a more of a red flag than somebody who does both equally. But yeah, I mean, you could run an experiment on yourself, and you could kind of see if you spent every day practicing 15 minutes of crying and 15 minutes of laughing, right? Do both. And then see if you go through a season of depression. You might not. Like, I'm not saying this will work for everybody, but you might find, say, if you have a natural rhythm where in a given year, you'll go through like 3 or 4 seasons of depression, and they'll last a month or a couple weeks, right? If you practice this daily, I would not be surprised if you then found yourself that year not experiencing either. Because for some people, and again, this varies from one person to another, this is not a universal fix, right? Nuance in therapy, we're all complicated systems. But if you practice daily expressions of sadness and daily expression of joy, you probably would find yourself far more balanced and not having to go to the extremes and seasons of one or the other. So that kind of brings us all the way back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the hour, and how, like, as we go through this life, like building these skill sets, eventually we have more and more of a control over how we respond to the physical changes and circumstantial changes of our lives, right? We're more in tune with it. We have more awareness. It doesn't fix things. And these skill sets, it's not just a degree of effort. I see some people even beating themselves up because they feel like they're not trying hard enough. And if they tried hard enough with this therapy techniques, then they'd feel good today. And that's not the way therapy works. But that doesn't mean that if you keep doing this stuff, you won't feel better eventually if you continue to be consistent. So that's kind of the balance. It's like yes, this therapy stuff really works and long term can help you be free and live your fullest and richest life. Can even, and like I said, gosh, I can't remember. I gotta start writing stuff down with journaling a little bit more of like when was the last time I was depressed and how long it lasted. Because I do remember there was one season that I'm like, I might be feeling a little depressed. But it didn't last long. It wasn't as near as intense as when I used to. And I was suffering from depression in seasons my whole life for like the longest time. Same thing for worry. Like I used to worry a lot. I was a chronic worrier and I rarely worry nowadays. It's very rare that I get myself in a situation where I'm stuck in worry. I much more am at peace and accept. And again, these skills, like eventually it just kind of works and you have more psychological flexibility is the term we use in ACT, where you just feel more at peace no matter what's happening. It doesn't mean that like when I was shivering yesterday, I wasn't like I was, asking my friends for prayer. I didn't feel great. It wasn't a positive experience. Like I didn't enjoy the shivering, but I wasn't freaking out either. And I wasn't panicking. I wasn't like building that because I was able to practice those mental health and say, I'm doing a great job. I'm safe. Everything is okay. This isn't going to last forever. I'm going to go through this. Ripley is cuddling next to me, so I'm going to be fine. So I literally used Ripley as my comfort girl, right? I did call her over at a certain point when I was shivering and be like, I just need something living next to me. I need somebody to comfort me. So she laid down on top of me at a certain point and just kind of her purring helped me regulate too. But, you know, I had to intentionally use that. Like I could have mentally put myself in a different space where I thought about like nobody's here, I'm all alone. I could have a heart attack and, maybe that's what's going on right now. Maybe my body is failing, maybe whatever. Right. And those thoughts would have then escalated the thing. This is why I love, oh, there she is. Little cuddle. Oh, she's so cute. Yeah. I'm talking about you. Anyway, why I love ice bath therapy is because it's very similar to the physical reactions to a panic attack. And one of the things that people do in a panic attack is they try to figure out why they're panicking. And we found that this escalates the panic because you're usually not able in the moment of your panic to figure out why you're panicking. It's not time for problem solving. And later on, we can start to look at patterns. But when you're in the midst of a panic attack, we just need to ground and calm and breathe and eventually get to a place that we're regulated. Then we need to do some work. But in the moment, we need to regulate. Okay. So in an ice bath, your body shivers, your breath is shallow, and you start to tense up. And so you practice when you're in the ice bath to slowing down your breathing, to visualize warmth, to start to try to relax your muscles, right? And to work with it. That's the goal of what you're doing in an ice bath. And the same is true for when you're going through a panic attack. Now, I wasn't going through a panic attack. It was different. It was some kind of physical thing, but it's the same principles that applied. And in that moment, I couldn't even shiver, right? I couldn't stop shivering. I couldn't breathe slow. I couldn't calm my breath, but I could tell myself I'm safe. I've got my trusty little fur baby with me, right? I'm going to be okay. And this is not permanent. And so that was the thing. And I just told myself that I didn't have much other things to comfort myself at that moment. But I could tell myself that over and over. And so I did. And so like literally moment by moment, I was telling myself, Richard, you're safe. I looked at my heart rate because I could check that with my Apple Watch, and I was like, "Your heart rate's okay. You're safe. Your cat's with you. You're gonna be okay. Everything is fine. You're doing everything you're supposed to do. Just trust the process and wait. Be patient," you know? And sure enough, after a little while, the shivering stopped. Then I had other symptoms, don't get me wrong. So it was like one after another, and it's tough. It's tough in this. I've used this, a lot of people have heard me talk about this one before. I think it probably in an unscripted conversation, but we're not getting a lot of questions in the chat, if I'm honest. So, um, when I was running one time, I remember that this thought occurred to me. I was running this route that I've done a lot of times, and the one thing that happens when you're running and you've done the same route over and over, that you start to like think about, at least I do, start to think about the rest of the route. And you can get like ahead of yourself. And then you're thinking about, oh man, I got so much left of this run. And it can make you want to slow down because you're like, I got to save some for the rest of the journey, which makes sense. That's thinking with strategy. And so I had that thought. And I could have been upset that I had that thought of like, you can't run this fast. You're going to panic, slow down. But then what I thought about was this exercise I call thanking the thought, where I thanked the thought. I said, hey, look, that thought is trying to protect me. Now, I don't need it. Right now, my heart rate's fine. I'm running well. I'm feeling good. Let myself deal with the rest of the journey when I get there. Right now, I'm okay. I'm going to keep being diligent. And if I need to slow down, I will. But if I can run this fast, I'm going to let myself run this fast. So that's what I told myself. I felt good, kept running. And then, like a few strides later, same thought occurred to me. Dude, you're running too quick. You're going to get exhausted. You're going to feel worse. You can't do this. You can't run this fast. Not for the whole way. You might as well slow down now. And then I got angry at myself, right? If I'm being honest, that was the next step. I go, oh man, look at me. I'm a therapist and I can't even do these techniques, right? And then I remembered, wait a second, the technique did work. It worked for like 10 seconds, but it worked. That's all it needs to. So many times I'll talk to clients about a skill that I just helped them with, and they tried the skill and they're like, well, it didn't work. And then I'll be like, okay, well, what happened when you used the skill? Well, I felt better for like a few minutes, sometimes they'll say, or like for like a little while. And then I felt bad again. And I'm like, wait, you thought you only would have to do this technique once? If it worked for a few minutes, that's amazing. Do it again every few minutes until you don't feel that anymore, which is eventually what I did. Is then I reminded myself, oh, wait, the technique did work. It only did work for a few seconds, this one, but it worked. And so then I thank that thought, right? Hey, thought that's beating me up, right? Me beating myself up. I know that comes from a place of wanting the best for me. I know that it comes from a place of wanting to always grow. So I get what you're trying to do, but it's not helping me right now because what I need is encouragement. And the technique did work. So I'm going to keep using it. So then I thank the thought of my trying to guard myself from high expectations, right? But I said, I'm running fine. My heart rate's fine. I'm doing okay. So I kept doing that. And I just kept thanking the thought. Like every time a thought of like, oh, dude, I don't know if you can keep this run up, I would thank it again. And I would keep on going, process, remind myself, I'm doing okay. All that to say, long story long, I ended the run the fastest I had ever done that route before. I never ended up having to slow down, and I got through it well. So the point is that when it comes to mental health skills, it's not that they're supposed to fix the Hey, got another thumbs up. I appreciate that. Those thumbs up do help the algorithm. It's not like practicing these mental health skills necessarily, one, take us out of it for good, right? That we can practice the skill once or even twice, and then we don't feel the symptoms anymore. And sometimes, no matter how hard we practice the skill, that day we are still going to be struggling. We're still going to be suffering. But it can at least make it so we're not making the problems worse. And over time, those skills get better and better, and we struggle less and less. So you got to be consistent and give it time. But if you keep doing these skills, whatever the mental health skills are, they make a compounding effect. You get better and better at them. And eventually you get to where, honestly, sometimes it even feels like a superpower, right? Because it's like you can manage in ways that you couldn't have imagined before. You can, and it's only your own emotional processing stuff and your own mental abilities, but like this stuff really does work. But you have to work it consistently. And if you don't work it consistently, and that's another thing that happens a lot, is that I see people that when they're going through a crisis, they're trying to work all these mental health skills, but they didn't practice them a lot when they weren't struggling. When they weren't struggling, they were just living life, right? They weren't practicing the techniques, and then they don't know how to apply them when they're panicking and struggling, which is, again, another thing why I love ice bath therapy, right? Because you have to practice that skill every time you go in the ice bath. So if you do have a panic attack, you know that the skills to practice because it's the same thing you've been doing every single day, right? So the same thing is true of like any of these mental health skills. So people that have struggled with depression a lot of times will be like, wait, you want me to spend 15 minutes of my day feeling sad on purpose? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would I try to feel sad when I've already struggled too much of my life, spending way too much time feeling sad? And this is, again, where we come into this negative feedback loop where we have disassociated and tried to push down a part of ourself that is part of our design. If we're a passionate, creative person, we're going to feel sadness. That is part of the deal, right? But we're trying so hard to push it down. We shouldn't be surprised when that part of ourself eventually complains and takes over. So, yes, exercising sadness, for lack of a better way of explaining it, every day can help you not go through seasons of depression, right? Actually allowing yourself to process through those stuff and building the skills to know how to feel sad without it consuming you, how to feel sad in a way that you can extract meaning and purpose and more deeply engage in what matters with you, will make such a big difference. So those are the things that we want to work on in therapy. That's what therapy actually is about on a skill-based level. Now, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot more nuances, but I mean, I kind of just today wanted to share. We didn't get a lot of questions, unfortunately, in the chat, but I appreciate the ones who did ask some questions. But the main thing I wanted to focus on today is skill-based stuff, not going through specifics, although I talked a little bit about a few of those. And you can ask me questions in other chats about what are some of these skills as examples. I'm happy to explain them. I love sharing about this stuff. But to maybe just have a reasonable expectation of what it's going to look like when you start to apply these skills, that they will help you not make things worse, but they won't necessarily fix things, especially that day. It's not a matter of just putting in more effort, but like anything, if you practice it the rest of the time, then when you're in a crisis, you'll be able to manage it well. So skill-based therapy stuff is like stuff that even when we don't feel like we need it, it's really good to keep practicing. It's really good to keep working on our stuff, because then when we're going through a crisis, we don't escalate it. We can process through it. So hopefully that's helpful for some of you, and appreciate those who logged in and those who came with the chat. If you are watching this some other time, we would love to have you. It's 7 o'clock Eastern time on every Sunday. I try to make it. I've only canceled, I want to think, once since I've started this. I will respond to things in the chat, and I do appreciate it whenever somebody can. In AA, we say, halt, am I angry, lonely, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Yeah, I was late. Yeah, that's okay. It happens. Uh, Someone else said they're usually hungry. Well, my brother always said, when it comes to his five love languages, food was what he thought was all five of them. So I'm usually tired. Someone else, yeah. Lately, I've been tired a lot. But like that halt thing is just a processing to go, okay, what's going on with me? And let me look at these things. And that's a pretty surface level one, but it's a good, short, quick one. When we have these quick slowing down our thinking because we're losing our values in that moment, if that makes sense. Got another like. Appreciate that like. So happy to chat. Thanks for everyone who joined. I haven't been at my best this week, hurting the person closest to me. Okay, that sounds like a lot to unpack, and we were just about to tap out, but yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you about that. The reality is, I know we're not talking about marriage, but some people say marriage is 50-50, and other people say marriage is 100-100 because you sacrifice 100% of yourself and they sacrifice 100% of themselves, and then you're happy. And I say marriage is often like you've got 10% that day and you're really hoping that person comes up with the other 90, because otherwise it's going to be a rough day. Like, the reality is we as human beings are not always at our best. And sometimes what we have to offer isn't a lot. And we just have to accept, again, do the best we can, and allow grace to cover over, because that's what love really is. Love is when I see the person for who they are, not who I wish they were, and I love that person as they are, right? So I know probably the person you're talking about, and they probably love you for who you are, and they probably forgiven you more than you think they have for whatever happened. So, all right. So that brings us to the top of the hour. Thanks again for logging in. And I had a short fuse all week. Yeah. Well, that's a good time to halt, right? It's a good time to ask yourself, what am I processing? What's going on? It's a good time to journal. It's a good time to spend some time meditating. Maybe it's a good time to let yourself get angry in a way that still fits your values. There's a lot of different things that we could talk about in that. But again, we're at the top of the hour. So tune in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Love you all. God bless and have a great day.